All right. So I've got two items on the agenda. The first one is, well, they're both kind of related. So the first one is about Gitaly, which I just got logged out. So let me re-authenticate. One moment. It's that time in the morning again. Okay. Uh, so I guess it's about logs and it's about having useful information in logs, which there's many different reasons why we would want that. I'm sort of looking at it from an SRE perspective, but I think it's also useful in other contexts. So as an SRE, I get paged with AppDex alerts. We use symptom-based alerting, and so it's going to say something is slow, right? And part of our job in scalability, I guess, in general, is diagnosing that type of stuff or helping diagnose that stuff. And so it's really useful to have latency attribution so that we can not only see what were the slow requests, but also where did they actually spend their time. And we've invested heavily in this type of sort of almost log-based metrics, I guess you could call them, for the Rails app, where for any given request, you can sort of see, okay, seconds spent in database was this much. And then you can compare that to the overall request time and get a sense of what was the expensive part of this request, and then aggregate that information. So on many of our other services that are not Rails, we don't have that much of that information. In some cases, we don't have any of that information. And Gitaly in particular has many different sources of latency. And so just to kind of share my screen, just to kind of show, let's sort of maybe talk through a Gitaly request to get an idea. So an RPC comes into Gitaly and it's got a concurrency limiter at the beginning of the request cycle. So and this is per repo. So if there's like a gazillion clones happening against a single repo, then that concurrency limiter will kick in. This is configurable per RPC. We've only enabled it on some of the long-running RPCs. But this concurrency limiter will then put everyone else in a queue, and they're going to wait. And so it's really useful to know if we're getting alerts for slow requests, okay, did they just spend their time waiting to like waiting their turn in the queue? And then the other thing that Gitaly does during most of its RPCs is shell out to Git commands, right? And so this is sort of an external call, and we want to know how much time was spent during that external call. So a while back, we got these command stats, which I'm not sure if we have an example of those here. Maybe not. But this basically says how much system and user time, like how much CPU time was spent cumulatively in this request for all commands that we shelled out. So that's pretty useful. But there were a few blind spots. And so this was a recent addition. So concurrency limit was one. And then we have a few other mechanisms. So spawn tokens are a way of protecting against excessive shelling out. And this is basically another queue that RPCs, if there is contention, RPCs are going to have to wait and being able to see that we were waiting, yeah, is a useful addition. So let me maybe open a few of these, and we can sort of see what the logs look like. Didn't have an example here, but I had an example in one of these for sure. Must have been this one. Yes. So cat file is, I'm not going to go into what it is, but it's a mechanism in Italy, and you can sort of do different operations against this cat file cache. And so we can see, okay, the overall duration spent in cat file was 1 millisecond. And then we've got a breakdown for 3 different types of operations here. So we've got a request object, we've got a read object, and we've got a flush. And so you can already, based off of these metrics, kind of tell, okay, we're requesting a lot of objects, we're reading a lot of objects, but we're flushing not that often. And so, yeah, there's actually a batching mechanism involved. So this, having not only the duration, but also the count, can also tell us when there's not enough batching going on, and also when there's load on upstream systems, where that load is coming from. Yeah, so these recent additions, I think, are going to be really useful for diagnosing alerts and other latency issues in Gitly. And I just wanted to highlight that and see if there's any questions or comments on that.
Why milliseconds instead of seconds?
Yeah, the Gitly logs use milliseconds, and so I kind of based it off of that. But I agree, it would be nice to have consistency. And in fact, it would be nice to also have consistency in field names across logs, which is pretty terrible. Like, even just going from Rails to Workhorse, the path is in a field called URI and stuff like that.
I've got maybe something to demo around that.
Okay.
Elastic people have kind of come up with a bunch of standardized.
I was gonna mention that. Yeah, what was it called? Elastic Common Schema or something?
Yeah, Common ECS, Elastic Common Schema. Yeah, I years ago I opened up an issue about it, but it's one of those things that's really difficult to kind of get buy-in.
Yeah,
people add logs without permission, right? They just it's a grassroots thing that people add.
Yeah,
so it's difficult to please.
I'm in favor of adopting something like that.
It's really awful at the moment because, yeah, like you say, like if you're trying to join path from one set of logs to another, you're joining path to URI, and yeah. Actually interviewed the person the other day for a role who put that together at Elastic very bizarrely. So maybe we should hire him and then he can help us with this. One of the people. So Bob, also on the milliseconds, like I don't know why I think this, but I think for logs, it's less important to have them all in the like SI unit than it is with metrics. I don't really know why, but certainly like all the gRPC logs that we've used forever have always used milliseconds, and it feels like the right, it's easy to grok.
As long as
seconds will be very small. Yeah.
I just prefer if they're all in the same unit because it makes it easier to calculate with them in the the query scripting thing.
The only one that I can tell you is definitively wrong is the runners, which use nanoseconds, which is like unreadable. Like everything's in the tens of billions, and it's awful.
Needs more scientific notation.
As long as it's in the name, it's good. Like if it's already suffixed
I
with
don't
the
even think it
unit.
is. It's just this string of numbers.
Yeah. The thing I was going to say about this is what's kind of important to me is that it's consistent within a given log stream so that you can compare and chart them against each other. So what's kind of nice to do is have a single chart, have like all of the duration fields summed.
Yeah, and see which one is the biggest chunk.
Yeah, yeah.
I do that a lot.
Yeah. So, but I agree, it's pretty awful.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think let's just leave it at milliseconds for now. If all the other fields are in milliseconds there.
Yeah, I think it's a broader discussion of whether we want to sort of unify our logs across streams.
Let's
Okay.
start by unifying them across services, and then we'll see if we can do better.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that point 3 is a good thing to talk about with that. Igor, is there a way that you can kind of communicate this information with like staff level support engineers who might find it also super helpful for self-managed instances where they might be having, Giddily is one of the big performance issues with self-managed, particularly with weird file systems and
Yeah.
and stuff. So is there, how can we like kind of let them know that there's this information, this new stuff that they could use?
Yeah, I mean, I can do a one-off outreach, but I guess the question is how do we have a channel that kind of communicates this in general?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'll think about it.
cool.
It's a good question. Thanks.
Because they'll certainly find it useful as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so moving on to the second one. So this is related, and it's sort of going from Gitly to now Registry, which has really sparse logs. And to be fair, I feel like I don't need to go looking at registry logs very frequently. It's been a fairly stable service, and yes, I've not had the need that often, but we did get a recent incident around some database performance issues in registry, and it was kind of hard to pinpoint just because we don't have this information. And so the step going from alert to kind of the external system that is most affected is tough because, like, what do? You go metrics fishing and hope you find something. And so I did open an issue to sort of promote this for registry as well. And it's basically the same thing, right? It's doing the same thing for registry that we have in other places. And so there's sort of 2 questions that came out of this for me. One of them is the maturity model that currently doesn't say too much about how your logs should look like. It just says they need to be structured JSON logs. That's it. So I'm curious what people think about giving a bit more guidance on what it could look like or what it should contain. And, we talked about the elastic common schema. This could be sort of our own version that at least says this type of stuff needs to be present, and maybe give some recommendations for units and field names for newly created logs. So at least we have consistency going forward.
I like putting this into LabKit.
LabKit yeah,
Ruby
and that was
only...
the second point. How can we make it easier?
Like LabKit Ruby isn't used that often, like 3 services, I think, maybe 2. Don't know.
Just is the container registry using LabKit for logging?
I don't even know, to be honest.
Because yeah, I mean it should be. If it's not, it should be.
Yeah,
I think it is. I don't know why. if I recall, they pushed a whole bunch of changes through to make it more sort of testable, which were good changes.
Yeah.
So maybe it was Kaz that did that.
I mean, the ownership around LabKit is also a bit spotty. There's various individuals from various teams that have merge rights, but it doesn't feel to me like anyone is actively pushing it.
I always feel that it should be, not that it is, but it should be owned by Scalability because it's or application performance, possibly, but I don't think they've got any committers on it at the moment, for example, maintainers at least.
Matthias?
On the LabKit Ruby, yeah. But certainly one of those two teams should kind of become more, because like you say, it's very badly, it's Igor, Steve, myself, and I don't know who else. Yeah, and obviously Bob on the Ruby one as well, and Matthias.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also not sure whether we have capacity to do this now, or like how this weighs against some of the other priorities that we've got. So maybe this is also more of a long-term thing to kind of keep in mind as we finish up stuff that we're working on at the moment. Yeah.
Continuing on that, let me share my screen.
You're going to 3.
Unless you want to expand a little bit more on the Go side of things?
No, go for it.
I don't know what it looks like currently in LabKit Go, but I liked what we did in LabKit Ruby. Actually, Matthias started this all. We had a bunch of loggers and stuff that lived in GitLab Rails only, and then we used LabKit to call out fields to put in those log messages. So every time we use the logger, where GitLab app logger, that is a JSON logger, or an import logger or anything like that, we would call out to the context, so LabKit context, and say, get me all the fields to add to the logs. And now Matthias, a while back, has moved all of the loggers, the structured loggers, into LabKit itself. So it means we've got the JSON logger there now. And this merge request changed part of the behavior here. Instead of just putting in the correlation ID and making sure that is always there, it's going to include the entire context all of the time. So that means anything that uses a JSON logger, and everything in GitLab Rails is going to have current context information always. We could add more fields here and so on, yeah, and expand on that. But I like that now all of these messages will have at least these fields consistently. And we could also start propagating them across services this way. That's all I wanted to share.
Yeah, on just on the context propagation, that's something that's quite strong on like tracing frameworks. So they have that sort of weird bag of things that you can kind of push with your trace. And it's one of the things, it's kind of really good, but also kind of terrifying, because people can put like 8K messages in there and pass that around to Giddily 50 times in a request. But in general, it's a really useful thing. But if you go look, that's very much part of like distributed tracing. That's context propagation.
That's part of, well, with mixed success, we've limited what goes into the context from GitLab Rails, at least, to be tied to a thing. Like there's this thing called application context in GitLab Rails, and it wants like IP addresses, records that are a project or a user or whatever, and then it expands information from that. But it's not like you need to add a field and its type and everything into the class before you can put stuff in. So that was in an attempt to
that's a good idea.
limit what goes in there, but mixed success.
Yeah, I mean, if we could use like I think the LabKit tracing already, if you push the context into there, it will push it in. But then obviously, actually, I think it passes along with the correlation ID. So, I mean, it might be something that's already
Correlation ID used to be like this separate thing, but now it's just part of the context. And the first context, like the root context, if you will generate a new one.
Yeah.
And then,
but I think for passing it between, is it we just putting a header in or something like that, right?
passing between was like, I would do that with the header, like from Rails to Workhorse, we could use headers from like the rack request headers we could use for those. From Rails to Gitly, we could, I don't know what that's called.
We use
the
gRPC header.
yeah, the metadata thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's been an ID for years already, so we haven't really advanced on it.
You're muted.
Apparently, I've got the next thing as well. That's just wow, we were looking into Prometheus and Thanos, and now that Thanos is its own service with like its separate dashboard. Actually, that's nicer to show. Let's start with that one. So now we've got, you see, and saturation points and everything.
So much clearer now.
Yeah, so now you can actually see something is happening with Thanos, and we'll get, and it works. The interesting things around it. Andrew, I'm sorry, I'm stealing your thunder. You did all of this.
No, if you make it 6 hours, you can see some more interesting stuff in this graph at the moment, Bob. Because you can see we had a little bump, and it shows in all the graphs, and it also shows in the CPU there.
Yeah.
So
this is fantastic.
Yes.
So much better. Actually usable now, finally.
Yeah. And I think the idea is to do the same with Prometheus. So then we just have a monitoring service that contains some logging and some, I don't know what else. Maybe we can make it the logging service then.
One of the things that's worth stating is that with this dashboard, previously we had it kind of split across like all the environments, like we do with all of our other services. So we have production and staging, but really it didn't make any sense because Thanos is operating as a single service, right? It's not multiple services in each environment, it's one service. And so breaking it up in that way actually really hides a lot of the information from you. And so we had to jump through a whole lot of hoops to get our monitoring system to be able to monitor across all environments as a single thing.
Yeah.
But that's not
see here,
done.
this thing doesn't have an environment variable, and if we open it up in Thanos, I think the environment is now already going to be Thanos.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, so we've got a new environment called Thanos, and Thanos lives there.
And I guess the question with Prometheus is I think Prometheus is probably like per environment, but yeah.
So I think we should keep it there, the GPRD, G staging, everything.
Yeah.
So the only part of Thanos that is per environment is the collector, like the
sidecar.
Sidecar and
store.
Thanos store.
But I found,
and the compactor as well, actually, right?
But I think what I'd rather see is like graphs on a single Thanos service where we have those things as being kind of broken down per environment,
Right. Yes.
rather than and then because we can do that in the detail ones.
Yeah,
Then
that's kind of what I'm getting
environment.
at. It would be useful to have on this page the breakouts still.
Because I don't know if those are really ready yet. Yeah, you can see they're a bit flaky.
Not yet, but I think we can use like an add environment as a significant label for this service, like for all SLIs, and then if there is one, then we'll see. Wouldn't that work?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something we should definitely consider. We were also, Bob and I were also talking about doing the same thing with the logs, although I'm pretty skeptical at the moment that these logs are being collected properly, because I've been logging onto the Thanos ruler box to get logs that I can't find in any of the Elasticsearch logs at the moment.
Yeah, but who knows where to look?
Pardon?
Who
No,
knows where to look?
but the Thanos ruler is running in ops, so I would expect it would be in the ops one, but there's no trace of the failed evaluations, but you can find them if you log in and read them off the box. But then you've just got to jump through lots of hoops with JQ to kind of read it.
On Thanos ruler, I am proposing to add new SLI. This one. That is supposed to measure how long a rule group takes compared to its interval. So if the rule execution of all the rules in the group take longer than the interval, that's going to be an error on the SLI. And I wanted to add this one for Prometheus and for Thanos. So that's the one that I'm working on now. And I want that because I want to get rid of some, like for the feature category metrics, we use intermediate recording rules, but those are not recorded in the same group. And I'm thinking that some of them, like, I want to get rid of this indirection because I think that some of the errors and like things going like with an aptX ratio being bigger than 100% and so on are coming from that indirection.
Right. I think that this might, if we can, it's kind of difficult to do, but if we can craft it as an aptX rather than error, it would be really nice. But I know it's hard.
The problem is, we've talked about this before, but the problem is that we're using success ratio for one and error ratio for the other. Like error counters and success counters for one and error counters for the other.
Okay, I'll need to look through it. But because the reason I'm thinking is we've got this rule evaluation, right? And we've already got an error rate, which is the rule gave a warning or an error when it was evaluated. And that's quite a nice error rate. But we don't have any sort of aptX or any sort of latency measurement or latency SLI for a rule evaluation. And this really is kind of a latency. It's like it's saying it's taking too long. But I know that it's really hard to measure.
The problem,
but for someone coming along in future, and they see that the latency is spiking, they'll know that it's that rather than the other thing. But
do you have an idea how to, because we already got the concept of counters, I think.
Yeah. I think you have to have a custom, you have to build a custom metric for the aptX. Because it's not a histogram. So normally for aptX we use a histogram.
We already have success counters in there, like as a custom thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can probably come up with something, but then we need to do like the.
But it's not trivial.
No, because we need both metrics to do the subtraction and like
But if we can, I just think, someone a year down the line who's on call and they get an alert, it will be clearer to them that this is a slowness problem rather than an error, because it's coming out as a slowness SLI. But
let me add that as a comment.
from an affordance point of view, if you want to say.
I added that as a comment. I'm going to give it another shot. How hard can it be?
Getting back into all that stuff this week was quite a sweat for me. I must say, I'm out of practice with all that JSON it. So I forgot how much of it there is.
You've written a lot of it, so it should be okay.
Close to scrapping it all and starting again. Joking.
Always the solution. Do you want to talk about the ownership of services that you brought up recently?
Okay. Bob put this on here, but I'm happy to talk about it. So Chance is doing this ownership thing for all the services. And I think it's really important, especially as we are as the new reliability teams are forming. And I think it'll help them kind of actually get like a real solid idea of like which of those teams owns which services, and then also which of our teams on the platform side, what we own. And then Rachel asked a really good question, which is, so we said we're going to get the managers to kind of choose which things they own. And then Rachel said, okay, but what does ownership actually mean? Which is a very good, but I think also very hard question to answer, and one that could be fairly philosophical. But what I suggested was that we just keep it very pragmatic for now. And effectively what it means is when something gets labeled in in the tracker with service : X, we know which team is going to triage that issue, right? It basically falls, and we can write a triage ops tool for basically assigning the team based on that. And it's their responsibility to keep the triage on those issues. And that doesn't mean that they're going to fix everything, but at the least they can say won't fix, or we're going to put this on the schedule, or we're going to reassign it to a different team. But they are the kind of entry into that. And via that, all the capacity planning issues, or if there's any sort of availability issues, will arrive at them because they are that first line of contact for that service. So that's kind of it. And then kind of more broadly as a future thing, which is kind of might be controversial, is, the scalability team's done a lot of great work to kind of push error budgets left in services like Web and API and Sidekick that are running application services. And maybe it's also time to start thinking about for like a limited number of services, also having some sort of error budget, but on the infrastructure side. So like the one that I'm thinking of most is to try and prevent the Thanos problem in future, right? So if Thanos is kind of degrading and kind of getting worse and worse and worse, we'll get to a point where we say, okay, this is something that needs eyeballs on it. And we start doing the same sort of error budget reporting as we do for application teams on the application side, but for certain infrastructure services. I don't think it would make sense to have double reporting for the web service for the application teams and for the infrastructure teams. I think we've got that service covered, but there's a whole bunch of services that don't have the same kind of coverage. And maybe it makes sense to start doing the same sort of accounting for those services. And it's very much like a very rough early sort of idea, but I've been thinking about it a little bit for a while. How can we know ahead of time when things are maybe getting a bit rocky on certain services, and then plan ahead for maintaining those services?
There are now Scalability has feature categories that apply to us and that we can use inside the application, and that could trickle down into SLIs and so on. Why can't we do that for all teams in reliability? For example, Thanos and Prometheus would be monitoring stuff, and then that would link to...
How do you do feature categories for Thanos? What feature category does Thanos, because it's kind of doesn't seem to
the problem is the name feature category, but because if it was just category,
right, or team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, but so the team ownership, that's that connection. But yeah, feature category I think is like a reserved word at GitLab because it very specifically means like a thing. But yeah, a categorization, and we roll them up so we can look at it at a higher, one of the things with the error budgeting was because we could roll it up to the level of teams and then to the level of directors. I think, that was a really important way of helping people kind of prioritize that stuff. And if we can do the same thing, but without, on services that are more general.
So everything now is sourced from that stages.yaml file. I don't really mean adding categories there, but we can't have more files. Like we can have our own infrastructure.
But is that not what the service catalog is?
Is that what is it?
I think to some degree it is. I don't know. Maybe not. Like, what's your opinion?
It can be that. I think we can change it to be that, and we can use that in our mapping file. We have our stage group mapping file. We could extend that and then refactor to change, because then the category for Thanos and Prometheus would be, well, monitoring, logging. I don't know.
But I mean, is it? Do we use feature categories or do we just say team? Like, do we say Thanos and Prometheus are team observability, reliability, observability?
For the same reason as you decided to use feature categories, I would go with categories, right, because things move, ownership and so on. So then if we do category metrics,
so we need to introduce our own feature categories that are like, what do you call them? Infrastructure categories or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
We have, whatever we call it, like naming's hard, but like, so you're saying that Thanos and Prometheus are like metrics, yes, and Sentry is exception management. And then in future, if those two things go to different teams, we don't change anything except for that attribution, in the same way that feature categories work.
Yeah.
Maybe service category or something along those lines could work.
Service category. But I think if we use the feature category, then people get confused because it's like,
yeah,
but
exactly.
But service category might be a good name for that. Yeah, I mean, it works very well on the product side to have those feature categories, and then they kind of Sam, I don't know if you kind of have followed, there's a file in the handbook called stages YAML, and then things get moved around and we don't have to worry about rearranging things because we just kind of follow the feature categories in that file.
I think that makes sense to do, especially as stuff gets more complex and you've got more diverse services that do slightly different things that need slightly different categorizations. Having that automatic and, a single source of truth is probably a good idea in the long run.
Yeah. So do we do the feature categories now as part of that service category thing, or do we just do the ownership now and then do that as a second stage? Probably better not to nerd snipe it and just get it done, and then we can break it up.
Yeah, get the first thing out, and then when we start using stuff and we see how to change it.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. We're at the end of the agenda.
So have a good rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.